Welcome to The Lamppost, and happy Monday. The Lamppost is a ministry of the Colonial Heights Church in Norfolk. Today we are joined by Dan Knust, a hospice chaplain working with Trinity Hospice. He has been in different ministries for the past 40 years and has a heart for the Lord and for people. Dan, I'd like to ask you about this ministry, which is kind of a newer ministry to you, and yet it's an old ministry as well, something that God has put on your heart many years ago. First of all, what is hospice?
Hospice is care for patients who are determined medically to be towards the end of life, typically a 6-month determination of end of life. And hospice is specialized medical care, sometimes in the home of a patient and sometimes in a medical facility such as a nursing home or hospital. But it is a team of people on the hospice care team who are made up of medical personnel, social workers, and myself, a chaplain, who provide what I consider body, mind, spirit paradigm of care, not only looking out for the well-being physically of the patient, but their emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being as well.
Very good. And what is chaplaincy? It's a little bit broader question, I suppose.
Yeah. The term or the practice of chaplaincy goes back to approximately the Middle Ages, to around the 1400s, when it was deemed necessary because of many different parachurch organizations, particularly beginning with the military, where spiritual, emotional, and of course physical need was paramount in the military, and specialized ministers, pastors, then termed chaplains, would serve themselves also in the branch of military, and they had a specialized care of the well-being of the soldiers in the military branch. Now, from that time, since that time, the branches in which chaplaincy exists has really broadened. Probably the greatest place of a chaplain today, other than the military, is in the hospital medical settings. I served in 2 internships, one at Norfolk General Hospital and one at Hampton VA Medical Center, going back about 10 or 12 years ago, 6-month internships in which I learned the process of chaplaincy in a hospital setting. Those 2 experiences were very new, to me, and very different from one another. And you will find that there are different philosophies of chaplaincy throughout the country, throughout the world. And some are heavily spiritually oriented, some are more psychologically mental oriented in terms of patient care. But the chaplaincy has grown in importance in the eyes of the medical community over the years, and it has deemed to be very important. And I have grown to love and appreciate not only my role in chaplaincy, but also chaplaincy as a whole. The term chaplain has its roots in the word chapel. And as you can imagine, that's where it began, in a spiritual setting of the church, but as a branch of the church, as a parachurch outreach of caring for those in other areas other than in a church setting, such as the military hospital. And we'll discuss a little bit more later about some of the other ways in which chaplaincy is also used today.
Now, you mentioned that some is along the spiritual lines and other psychological, I think is what you said. Would you say that one would have to be a Christian to be a chaplain, or is that kind of a wrong thought on my part?
There are chaplains who have every spiritual background or base imaginable. There are rabbis who are chaplains, there are imams who are chaplains, so every different faith, and even there are those who are agnostic or atheistic who are chaplains, because they're very concerned for the psychological and emotional as well as physical well-being of patients, and they have a real draw and a real calling for that. So to say that there is a particular spiritual base to chaplaincy is a generalization, true in many cases, but not true in all cases.
Okay. What would you say the qualifications would be to be a chaplain? And maybe let's take it from a Christian standpoint, or if you'd like to broaden that out, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Qualifications are specific and yet broad. For instance, if there is an organization, perhaps a smaller organization, say a firehouse, a police station, a nursing home, care center, who has a real relationship or a calling or drawn to a particular candidate who does not have their official accreditation for chaplaincy, they would be free to hire that person. Let me explain the national or official accreditation for chaplaincy. Organization called the ACPE, Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, which is part of the American Association for Pastoral Counselors, AAPC. But this is the national accreditation service for helping train chaplains and giving their stamp to the chaplain who is seeking that accreditation in order to serve in some capacity in the chaplaincy. Again, whatever capacity that they would be seeking. And the requirements are that they receive 4 CPE units or credits. CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. And I received 2 credits in my pursuit of chaplaincy and never, for various reasons, completed that process. Also required is education. Many colleges and universities today offer degrees, whether it be undergraduate or graduate degrees. I was pursuing my graduate degree in Master of Divinity and Chaplaincy emphasis, and at Regent University. And so the education is required, the CPE credits are required, and there are many different institutions that offer that CPE training. Again, mine were at Norfolk General Hospital and Hampton VA Medical Center.
Would you say that there are some, and call them personality types or people of certain giftedness, that would make better chaplains? What are some traits or qualities that you see that are important or necessary for chaplaincy?
Our training, we were told that our faith base helps inform who we are and what we do in chaplaincy. So as a chaplaincy in either a faith-based or a secular setting, you could say that chaplaincy in general is considered to be broad or pluralistic. Pluralistic doesn't necessarily mean secular. It means broad. It means that you're not there to present the Christian faith to a patient. You're there to find out what their faith or non-faith is and support them in that. Now, if they ask you a question about your faith that is pertinent to their growth and healing, by all means, you have the right or the ability to share your thoughts, but mainly it's not about you sharing about yourself, it's about helping them share about themselves.
In other words, you're there to ask more questions than give answers, at least initially.
Sure, absolutely.
Are there times that you're dealing more with the family than the person who is in the last stages of life?
In the beginning of my current role as a hospice chaplain, 3 of my first 4 patients were non-communicable. That is, they could not communicate. They were advanced either in their physical state or their Alzheimer's or dementia, and could not communicate. So in those cases, sure, my role there is to be with the family and to support the family and to find out about the patient through the family, because sharing a patient's story from a family viewpoint is very, very important. It's very cathartic. It's very helpful because everybody wants to tell their story. I've met very few people, not only in my role as a pastor or chaplain, but in life in general, who don't want to express what makes them tick, who they are, what's important to them. And in that kind of sharing situation with a family member, they very much want to share about their loved one who is in the end of life stages.
So when the patient dies, when they pass away, that ends your role as a hospice chaplain?
No, not at all. In some ways, it just begins then, because there's 2 major roles. As my official title is spiritual care counselor, and in that role, to initiate relationship first of all, because going into a family and meeting them for the first time, they don't know who I am, and so it takes time to develop relationship over a relative short period of time. And so getting to know the patient if possible and the family members up front is critically important. But at the time of the patient's death, we come into the role of being a bereavement counselor. And in that time, there are certain things that we provide as not only as a person who cares for them, but as a bereavement counselor. There's time of counseling to help them with dealing with the passing of their loved one, and then down the road over several months up to a year, we provide contact, letters, phone calls, cards, flowers if necessary, help with funeral arrangements if that's necessary, if they don't have a funeral home that they're working with. And I think something at this stage is very important to say, that the role of a chaplain, does not take the place of a local pastor that's working with that family or as part of their church. We're there to be a support role. And so we might perform some roles that a pastor may not, but we're not to perform the roles necessarily that a pastor would provide. And so we're there to support and to be complementary to the medical as well as other spiritual roles of people that are in the lives of the family.
Well, you call yourself a spiritual care counselor or an SCC. I noticed you've learned your alphabet since I've known you. Lots of alphabetical things. Would you say that some chaplains might be too aggressive or too assertive with their faith to be effective, or is that not really a thing?
It depends, again, on the philosophy of the given organization, whether it be military, hospital, nursing home. Let me give you an example. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I took a 2-day online symposium called Spiritual Care Symposium. It was based out of Tennessee, where, as you are well aware, is part of what we call the Bible Belt. And there are many medical facilities in that part of the country that are overtly Christian-based. In fact, some of them only hire Christian chaplains for their work in their medical facilities. So they're very overtly Christian. They express, again, these particular Christian-based organizations, they express that their primary role in chaplaincy care is the salvation of their patients. Now, that is not what I learned in my chaplaincy training. My chaplaincy training was more holistic, if you want to call it that, more pluralistic, in that we are concerned about what the patient is concerned about. If the patient is concerned about their spiritual well-being, they're not sure about their salvation, they feel guilty before God, there are a myriad of issues that a patient who is facing end-of-life issues, they reflect upon these things very deeply oftentimes. And so our role in that way as a chaplain is to guide them and help them to discover what it is that they need. In that case, if they're seeking their salvation, if they're seeking a certainty of heaven, whatever it might be, our role is to guide them in that process.
You mentioned internships a little bit earlier and now during your training. What were some of the things that you learned during those times, or maybe were surprising to you?
Probably in the minds of my supervisor anyway, the biggest mistake that I made with one particular patient was that I shared my testimony with them. I shared about my salvation process. And that was, in his mind, a big no-no. in that wasn't my place or my role to do that. It wasn't cathartic to the patient. I felt at the time it was. I felt that's what the patient asked me to do. So I thought it was appropriate to share that. But in reflection, my supervisor helped me to see that what was really important was to help the patient to reflect upon what their story is, what their testimony is, and to help them to find a place of true solidity, if you want to call it that, of substantial spiritual placement and growth for them to grow from that place. And dealing with their hospital stay and whatever was going on with them physically at the time obviously plays a part in that.
Are you suggesting that chaplaincy is different in a PC world, a politically correct world, or is that really not what this is about?
Well, politically correct is not a politically correct statement at times
Okay.
in the world, because it means so many different things to so many different people.
True.
But it is true. You can boil it down to this. Spirituality in its definition has changed drastically in the last several hundred years in the world, and particularly this country. What at one time was it meant spirituality meant faith in God, and many cases Christianity. But as this country has become more of a melting pot and more accepting of different religions and different faith base coming into this our borders, and we've seen that change in a lot, and it's changed in the role of chaplaincy as well, to where at one time it was very very much Christian, and now it is very broad in its application. So to say that we have to be politically correct, in some ways is true. We have to make sure that we are not being offensive, because the last thing we want to do is cause a wall between the chaplain and the patient. We want to make an open door. We want to be help in any way that we can, and to simply go in with our Christian guns blazing is not many times the best thing for the patient.
At times when I've been preaching out of Matthew chapter 5, I've talked about the fact that we are salt and light. And I've talked about how, if you want to put salt on popcorn, you don't dump a pound of salt on the popcorn or steak, for that matter, because it will ruin it. If we're going to shine a light, it's not shining the light in somebody's eyes. It's lighting the path. And it sounds like that's the approach that you take to chaplaincy, is that you give enough salt and you give enough light that the person can take it where they want to or need to go from there.
Yes. If a patient discovers their path more clearly, it is ultimately more effective than me telling them where their path leads.
What are some biblical examples, verses, passages, concepts that you see that relate to chaplaincy?
I think this really goes to, first of all, what I said before about a chaplain's faith informing their work. Being centeredness, it's all about being centered. If I'm going to be thrown off my game as a chaplain by a difficult curveball that comes my way from a patient, I'm going to be much less effective. And so the scriptures inform and give me a centeredness for my effectiveness as a chaplain. That has to do, I believe I have a very strong compassion gift from God, and that's what led me to chaplaincy. That's what led me to hospital ministry to begin with. That's what led me when I was in the pastorate. I was the one running to the hospitals when many were running away from the hospitals. That is not to pat my back, that's to pat God's back, because He's the one who gave me the compassion gift, a gift of mercy, gift of being able to look at others through the eyes of Jesus and see who God made them to be and who they can become, more so with proper guidance and help from them. There are a myriad of passages that would help a patient in their time of need as well. And part of my role as a chaplain is to find out where the patient or the family is coming from spiritually, and then allow the Word of God to speak to them in a way that would be most effective. There are some passages which they wouldn't grasp or wouldn't understand, perhaps, or wouldn't be applicable to them in that particular need. Not that all of the Word of God is not applicable at one time or another. But some of my favorite passages are, the most common one we see, especially at the ball games, is John 3:16. The love of God that He brought to us through Jesus is so holistic. It's so great to every need that we have in life, that is so applicable to a person's body, mind, spirit paradigm in every way, that it is key to allowing the scriptures not just to be a sign at a ball game, but to be a part of the complete holistic healing of patients that we meet in hospice care.
When you were talking about running toward while others are running away, I thought about Matthew 25, It's a passage that quite often we look at as a passage about judgment or the judgment. But, Jesus says, when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. Would you say that these are a lot of the things that chaplains do, or the type of concept that would describe chaplaincy?
Yeah, absolutely. Really caring for a person in their place of need and providing for them. And it's amazing to come to realize what a cup of cold water really means in its application. When a person is parched or scorched in a desert, what is the one thing that they ask for most? It's a cup of cold water. And that has a myriad of applications. Spiritually, emotionally, physically, mentally. If a person is hurting, if a person is dry, there are many ways in which we can offer help in that need. And that symbolically, I think, is that cup of cold water that we give to people.
Recently, I was preaching and talking about Deborah and about Sisera, the enemy, and how he was given a cup of milk when he had asked for water. You would never do that as a chaplain, right? Okay, so you also mentioned mercy. And I thought about Acts chapter 9, where Peter, who was probably a pretty busy guy, took time to go to a funeral visitation. Tabitha, or Dorcas, had passed away. And when Peter got there, they were talking, the widows were talking about the ministry that she had. Maybe that's part of chaplaincy as well, in a sense. But Peter went and was there with people and for people. Of course, he raised Tabitha back to life, so I don't really expect many chaplains to do that today. But, God is still God. But, I think about that mercy of Peter knowing the needs that people had and reaching out to them. When you mentioned compassion, I thought about Romans chapter 12. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. So as a chaplain, you're really reaching outside of yourself to share the love and compassion of God that others have. In a sense, we are his voice to speak his love, his arms to hug, his hands to serve, his feet to go. Would you say that that's part of chaplaincy as well?
Yeah. And a big part of being just caring for people in general, particularly in chaplaincy, you need to place yourself in an open position to be ready to receive whatever happens. You're not going in with a predetermined game plan, as it were. I need to tell them this, 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 and this. Now, there may be some information or some referral or resource information that a family may need going forward, but in general, you need to be open to allow. And I think that's the key of Jesus' life, his ministry, that he was open to listen. He was willing to hear where people were at, what they had to say and do. And if you remember, those people that Jesus best met were those who were honest with him. And if you can allow your patients and family to know that you're first and foremost compassionate for them, but then honest with them about what's going on. You don't try to sugarcoat things. You don't mince words. You go in with all of the compassion you can muster, but at the same time, the truth and honesty that is necessary to help people really meet the needs of what they're going through.
What should ordinary people learn from this concept of chaplaincy and what you've experienced and seen? What should ordinary people be doing to help others around them, that kind of thing?
My best way to illustrate this, and my favorite story of my ministry years in New York going back, was my very best friend at the time in the church there. His name is Joe. His mother passed away after a long illness. I spent a lot of time with the family before that passing, just wherever I could and however I could, and spent time getting to minister to them. But at the funeral parlor, at the funeral home, during the funeral service and the gathering of people well-wishers and so on. For about 2 hours, I stood at Joe's side and didn't say a word. People came by, told Joe a myriad of things. Oh, she's in a better place now. You don't have anything to worry. The burden's off. And after everyone was gone, and I was still there, Joe turned to me and said, "That meant more to me, your being here, than all the people that came through tonight, because you didn't try to tell me what you thought I needed to hear. You were just there for me." The ministry of presence is what I'm saying. Being with people. You don't have to say much. You don't have to have magical words. Just being with people, letting them know you care. The ministry of presence.
Dan, how is God working through you in chaplaincy now? How do you envision God using this ministry? What's He doing through you?
I believe being in the place where God wants me to be is what it's all about. Representing Jesus is so important. Being a person of faith, being willing to share what people need. When you know you're in the right place at the right time, that's when God will most use you. And I think that's what I believe God is doing, working through me in that place at this time.
I found your story to be so interesting, and you and I have been friends for 50 years, but I know that God has prepared you for chaplaincy. And to watch as you've had opportunity after opportunity that hasn't really worked out the way that you had prayed about it, but just knowing that God was going to put you in this place because He uses you to minister to other people. And Dan, I know you're a person of compassion, a person of mercy. I know that you're there for people, and God's put you in the right place. The other scripture that I thought about that we'll close with is in Matthew chapter 9, that Jesus went to the home of a girl that was sick, and God used Him to minister to them in that way. Thank you, everyone, and Dan especially, thank you for your words about chaplaincy today, the ministry that you do.